I teach high school as my day job, and whenever I tell my students that I use Discord, they look at me like I'm crazy. It seems to be like a young person's universe. So yeah, the question that we're grappling with right now is Brett's question, which is it possible to be simultaneously a fart smeller and a smart feller? And I personally believe that yes, it is possible. Because I think that we're different selves at different times, with different people, at different places in our lives. Um, I believe that the concept of sort of code switching, or of the fact that we fall into different roles with different people, like any of us who've kind of been away from, like any of us who've been away from our parents for a long time. And then you go back around your parents, and then suddenly you're like their child again, and they're your parent again, and then you're like a completely different. You just immediately start performing the pattern of behavior that they expect from you. It's like an algorithm turns on, but then like you're at work. Yeah, you're at work and you're a confident, capable person, and then you're around your father who's been calling you, you know, who's been sort of expecting you to screw up your whole life, and then you kind of just start tripping over yourself. So we're different selves around different people and different times in our lives. The self is sort of like a shapeshifter, like Brett just mentioned. So I do think it's possible for somebody who's at least had sort of the view of the path, who's gained like a vision of right view, you can say in traditional language here, gained some wisdom, to simultaneously be a fart smeller and a smart feller. You can have a lot of wisdom in the mind and still have old habits arise that are from, prior to the rising of that wisdom that you have to sort of contend with. It's a matter of kind of, I guess, bringing it all together, and bringing the mind into unification, which is perhaps why when we look at what's it called, the Great 40, and then 117, why the path takes a different shape there, right? Right view precedes virtue, and then it ends with everything coming together in Samma Samadhi. So perhaps it is possible that we can have the right view, that the eye of Dhamma, that wisdom, arise in our mind first, and then we still contend with those old habits that have to be purified through virtue. And then when those things all come together, it culminates in the unification of mind, which is that Samma Samadhi with its 7 helpers. That's how it's articulated in the Great 40. Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Nice. Yes, and then the crowning path factor of the Noble Eightfold Path then is right samadhi and the unification of the mind within it, and then looking at the 4 tetrads. In the 4th tetrad, the Panya function occurs, and within it there is substitution of opposites. And so that zips up, and we integrate these things. And so I was also referring to that as well, not simply just surfactant changes in personality, how we might perceive or manifest personality, but that's also relevant on a whole nother level. So thank you.
Oh, okay. You're welcome. Yeah, good question. So I'm curious. One thing I love about Dhammarato is his ability to kind of communicate a lot of Dhamma in like language that people can feel in their bodies. And I have a bit of a different tendency to use a lot more like sutta kind of based technical language sometimes, and lots of visual metaphors. But the reason I bring that up is there anybody here who has less acquaintance with the suttas, or like just like Buddhist terminology?
Absolutely me. I am like brand new.
Okay, what's your name?
Torah.
Oh, was that you who said that? I thought, okay, the person below you on my screen was also raising their hand.
Yeah, I'm
Torah,
Torah.
you're completely new to Buddhism, and so and then the person below you on my screen who came in recently, what was your name, by the way?
I think his mic is okay. There we go.
It's Shamil.
Michael, who I have already talked to before, and who's really nice.
Okay. So are there 3 Michaels here?
Wow, that is a lot of
There's
Michaels.
Because I'm Michael.
so basically, yeah. There's just you and me, Michael, as the 2 Michaels, and then Shamil and Torah have both said that they're pretty new to Buddhism
Oh, okay.
/
Shamil. Okay, great. I kind of like also trying to put faces to the names that I see on Discord as well. So anyway, the reason I bring that up is that if I say something and I use a lot of that type of language and it doesn't make sense, just go ahead and ask me to clarify, and I can rephrase it. I'll do my best to do that.
Same here, please, because I occasionally use Pali because the way I was taught in the past, and the way I experienced practice, some of the times and some of the sensations that arose in meditation, in samadhi, were the taste and the flavor of those sensations had no English equivalents in my experience.
Mm-hmm. That can happen. Shamil, Torah, Ivan, wondering how you guys are feeling today, and if there's any sort of challenges or questions that are coming up in your practice that you wanted to kind of put forward, just to kind of use this space to kind of help everybody's practice.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have, but my mind is kind of blank right now. So if I can't think of anything, I will say it.
Okay. Torah, I saw you unmute for a second.
Yeah. Today has been a day of rumination for me, like a lot of reflection on past mistakes and trying to plan for the future. But my understanding is that Buddhism focuses primarily on the present moment. And the idea of attachment, I guess, is something that I've been reflecting on, as someone who is not only in a relationship, but is polyamorous. Like I have multiple partners. The concept of abandoning attachment to them is confusing, but like I'm never going to stop loving them, And I feel like on first hearing, that's kind of what abandoning attachment sounds like.
Yeah, that's actually a really great question, I think. And I had this conversation with more polyfundamentalists, I would say, than myself. And the way that I look at it as somebody who's been in a relationship for 21 and a half years, the concept of like abandoning dear ones, as sometimes it's worded, Brett as well has been in a very long relationship. We're both married, not to each other, but so anyway, the way that I like to think of it, just to kind of start on your question, is that if you look and you attend primarily to the Four Noble Truths, and you look at everything else that the Buddha teaches through the context of the Four Noble Truths, everything is referring to sort of our internal response to the world. So the Buddha defines the world as what the mind creates in its relationship between the sensation, perception, cognition. So it's sort of like how our mind represents whatever it's processing to us. So what we contact, what we call the world, is already sort of been processed by our organism before we contact it. So most of the Buddha's teaching, if not all of the Buddha's teaching, isn't dealing with external objects. It's dealing with our internal response to it. So when the Buddha talks about abandoning attachment or abandoning craving and clinging in regard to the world, he's not saying that we need to like throw away the people that we love. He's basically saying that we need to throw away our fixation on the way that it's represented to us by our minds. Let me try to think of an example. Okay, a relationship's actually a great example. So when you first meet a person and you fall in love with them, right? Of course, cravings involved in falling in love. But let's just say it's not 100% that. Let's say that there's more to it than just that. But very soon after people fall in love, oftentimes they start trying to control the person that they're with. They start being afraid that the person might cheat on them. They start trying to change how they dress, how they look, how they speak, what they do, how they behave. And the reason for that is exactly what the Buddha is talking about. Is usually when we meet another person, we sort of first form an image of them in our mind, and we almost fall in love with the image we have of that person, and then the reality of that person comes into conflict with the image that we've created. So that mental image that's created of the person that you've fallen in love with is actually what the Buddha is talking about when he's talking about attachment. The Pali term for it is upadana, and it's translated as attachment, but it actually, the word itself means fuel, and it is thought of in four different ways, as sensual objects, views, ideas of the self, and I'm forgetting the fourth right now, but essentially it's something that the mind weaves under the influence of desire and ignorance. So these are static concepts, right, that the mind creates, these attachments. They're static concepts. And reality is this ever-changing process. That's what anicca, or impermanence, teaches us. And people are ever-changing processes, right? So to love somebody without attachment would actually be of benefit to them and to you, because you're never going to try to fix them in
Conditions.
accordance with the way that you've created them in your mind, right? We even create ourselves in our minds. Bhante Punjaji, he's a Sri Lankan monk. He's recently, well, not recently, but he's passed in the last 5 or 6 years. He has a really funny thing he says, right? When he talks about Sakkaya Ditthi, or self-view, he says basically, like, not only do we create images of other people in our minds through the process of perception, but we create an image of ourselves in our minds. That what Sakkaya Ditthi is actually a self-image, and it's not what you actually look and sound and behave like. And this is probably not going to hit as well with the modern generation, because you guys are used to seeing yourselves in pictures all the time. But it used to be pretty common that if somebody brought a picture of you and you'd look at it, you would say, that's not me, right?
Yeah.
Because the photograph doesn't match your mental image, right? Because the mental image is a static concept
Bingo.
that you've created of yourself. So the point here is that we do that with ourselves, we do that with other people, we do that with objects in the world, and these are actually the sort of attachments, you can say, that we've created in the mind. And that's what you want to abandon, so that you can experience a dynamic reality, rather than like your static concepts coming into conflict with this dynamic reality. Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
And then dropping into heart with this, and I think we can do that. And I think when we do, it could be quite another perspective that could be practical, because once we
Hey, Alex.
love without attachment, hello,
Like a Jedi.
it brings our relationship. It brings the attachment is the selfish aspect of clinging that's hard to see. Often we like to cover over this clinging and this selfish aspect with the idea that it's giving, or with the idea that since I'm clinging to you, I love you. And when we say I love you, often we're referring to the cling, we're referring to what we're getting out of it, whether or not we realize that or not. And then with sati, with practice, the way anapanasati, following the breath, when we come into this moment and really examine what makes us happy and what makes us, our partners, happy. Over time, when we grow together and become closer, regardless of how you define your relationship, monogamous or not, or with selfishness removed, and when that is attenuated, then you can be there. You have the capacity to imagine what makes them happy, often before serving yourself. And I think that's a maturation that can come with commitment to your practice and commitment to your partner or your partners. And I've experienced that.
Yeah.
And often patience is the way. If and it is, especially in a long-term monogamous relationship, where there are aspects of your partner that, or they may be carrying defilements or habit or habitual tendencies that you've put down, but the tendency to judge falls away, because once that cling is not there, you can allow them to have the freedom to grow in their own way, in their own practice. And so, okay, so I won't continue on and ramble, but maybe I made some stuff kind of, and it feels wonderful because you're giving more, and and selfishness is painful. It's dukkha.
Yeah.
Can I say that pretty much aligns with what I feel like I have discovered about monogamy, which is I feel like it itself is an attachment. Although I'm not trying to convince anyone to be polyamorous or anything, but
Yeah, I tried that 30 years ago.
Like
40.
I also have had questions about things like sensuality versus sexuality, where I identify myself as someone who is sex positive, asexual. And I kind of view myself to an extent as somewhat celibate now, in terms of I don't have any particular desire to have sex with people anymore. And I kind of just view relationships as things that can come into my life, and I don't have to put labels on them necessarily. Maybe that itself is an attachment, how I view people as being partners or non-partners. You know, I feel like ideally I'd like to abandon the concept of partners altogether and just have people who I love in my life, and there's people who love me in different ways. Whereas I kind of view my love as maybe only being in one way, and sexuality is more something that is an expression of love than it is, and it doesn't have to be, but it can be. And that's how I think sexuality can be different from sensuality, where I feel like sensuality is being attached to sex and viewing it as something that is necessary for one to have, and viewing it as, I don't know, like a necessary goal of life. I think maybe there were times in my life where I viewed it that way, but I don't anymore.
One thing that comes to mind for me, a couple things came to mind. But the first thing I'll mention is that one of the great things about the way that the Buddha structured his teachings, just around the Four Noble Truths, is that, like, there's just like 8 billion times several trillion things that we could think about, to talk about, to wonder about, to question, right? I say 8 billion because that's how many people are on the planet, times 8 trillion things that each human being comes up with in their mind as, like, what is important, what's not important, what should I do, what shouldn't I do. And the Buddha was aware of this. His cultural context was ancient, what we now call India, where so many different religious views, philosophical views, cultural views were all around him, and he said, okay, how do I get straight to the point? So he reduced everything he taught to what nowadays we would call a radical phenomenology, which is just the presence or absence of one single phenomena, right? Radical phenomenology in the modern sense is attending to the presence or absence of whatever phenomena is here. But the Buddha reduced it even further to just one, which is, we all know what it is, right? It's dukkha. So the presence or absence of dukkha, right? So dukkha nirodha. So, Buddhism doesn't really feel the need to contend with all of these questions and concerns necessarily that we have sort of now, right? Because we can spin and spin and spin and spin around these things for the rest of our lives. And the Buddha is pretty much, there's so many suttas where he's approached with different discussions. And if it falls outside of the realm of what's presently what's knowable here and now. If it's not knowable here and now, he puts it into the basket of what he calls speculative views, right? And the Buddha abandoned all speculative views, and he says, in the Agavajjagota Sutta, that he abandons all positions, all cogitations, essentially. And this is not this is for the purpose, because our experience of dukkha is so primary and so prolific that it requires a radical sort of focus in order to really get at it. Because as soon as you attenuate or satisfy one question, one desire, one doubt, another one will pop up. It's like a
A
fungus or
thicket of
something.
views. It's a
Yeah,
bramble, a thicket of views.
exactly. A bramble, a thicket. Here where I live,
Thorny one.
Himalayan blackberry of views, which is a bramble.
Mhm. Can I
Um,
say,
or
I am reminded. Oh, go ahead.
It's a quagmire.
Yeah, so I'm giving you a broad spectrum answer for all the stuff that you brought up, which is
Yeah.
that
Oh, sorry.
it just bringing it back to dukkha nirodha, which is like being satisfied, completely satisfied with things exactly as they are, no matter what, right? Because our satisfaction becomes independent of circumstances, it becomes independent of answers to questions. It becomes independent of metaphysical positions, philosophical views, religious doctrines. We just sort of make the wise choice to be satisfied with things exactly as they are. That's the inclination of the mind, right? The inclination of the mind is the second item on the attitude. The leaning of the mind is the second item on the Noble Eightfold Path. The first being right view, which is to understand that everything that arises, everything that we experience, is arising, sustaining, and passing dependent on causes and conditions. That's the conditions of our culture, the conditions of our biology, the conditions of our personalities. And because the complexity of these conditions are giving rise to what we're coming into contact with, trying to grapple with all of that is sort of fruitless, right? So by understanding all views to be conditioned, whether it's the view of monogamy is the right way to go, the view of polyamory is the right way to go, the view that you should be a Democrat or you should be a Republican or this or that, anything. I mean, it's endless. Anybody you talk to, they'll have something that they think is the most important thing that you should agree with, and that's the worst thing here and the best thing here and a bunch of stuff in between. It's completely endless. So that's why it really all just comes back to, if you want to be, if you want to gain the freedom that the Buddha offers, is bringing everything back to that dukkha nirodha. Is dissatisfaction present? If dissatisfaction is present in experience, which if you take a look, it oftentimes is, then that means that at some level you're wanting something that you don't have, which is that craving, right? And then you realize that there's nothing that can truly satisfy the mind. There's nothing external that you can get which can truly satisfy the mind, which is another understanding of dukkha, right? That's the object side of dukkha. So then you abandon the wanting. That's the duty to the second noble truth. You understand what dukkha is. You understand that it's both a subjective thing that we add to experience, and it's the fact that objects of experience can't satisfy. So we know it fully. That's the duty to the first noble truth, to know dukkha. And the second noble truth, the duty to the second noble truth, is to abandon its cause, which is that craving, that wanting things that we don't have. And then the third is to realize its cessation, which is when it's absent, when you have abandoned craving, when you have abandoned wanting what you don't have, to sort of like delight and appreciate the absence of wanting what you don't have, delight in being satisfied. So it all comes down to that. And then doing that is pretty much what the old Eightfold Noble Path is. It's paying attention to the presently arisen or the presently enduring experience, seeing if there's dissatisfaction, and returning to a state of satisfaction. And when that really gets going, the mind stops producing questions, the mind stops producing problems, the mind stops producing reasons to not be satisfied, essentially. Because these are all just different reasons to remain dissatisfied, because craving wants to exist. it only exists when the mind's in a state of dissatisfaction. It's basically the shaking of the mind. And then when the mind stills from being satisfied, then craving isn't present. So it's trying to keep itself alive, essentially, by continuing to throw reasons to be unhappy, reasons to be unsatisfied, reasons to feel confused. And we just keep feeding it because, we don't realize that's what's going on until we do.
Shamil, do you have
Also,
a question?
Oh wait,
Who?
I find it, like, especially with more practice, to be able to apply it very easily when I'm sort of sitting still. But like when I'm sort of moving through everyday life and everything, very quickly I get like overwhelmed and I have to like take a minute to like sit down and then remember it again. I've always like I guess wondered, what is the difference between just having to like do stuff and just sitting still that makes it harder to remember, I guess, is a question.
It gets complicated.
Yeah.
mind
The,
moments occur
fast.
rapidly. It's fast. The mind is fast. Human speech and internal speech is extremely rapid. And our sati, our mindfulness, the mental factor, that the faculty that we produce that uses lessons in the past to apply observation in the present to spot dukkha in the light of the First Noble Truth, requires us to attend to reality, that here and now, with alertness. And so when we stand up, when there's more stimuli, there's more contact at the sense doors, the aggregates, the clinging aggregates, it becomes more difficult because both subtle and coarse dukkhas are impacting at a rapid rate. Wouldn't you agree, Michael, that that is a factor? Another thing that I wanted to mention previously when Michael was discussing craving so skillfully is to mention that also aversion is a form of craving. So it's not just wanting in the traditional default kind of what we think of sense, but also wanting to get rid of. So if there are irritants, distractions, or if we develop inside ourselves an aversion to another, then that's another form of craving, right? That's dukkha, craving coming up. We want to get with things we don't want. So that's also a basic thing that to cover.
Yeah, my favorite way of thinking about Shamil's question, or what's the difference between sitting practice and practicing in the world, is to think about sort of the process of addiction recovery. So, you think of somebody who's addicted to heroin. They have certain settings, certain friends, certain stories that are part of their friend groups. Let's say they, at first, I think every addict has a group of friends. Maybe it becomes isolated at a certain point. Ways of seeing the world, and then so all of these things in recovery would be considered triggers. Like parents might be triggers. The people you did drugs with might be triggers. Your old house might be a trigger. Your job might be a trigger. Stress might be a trigger. And in Buddhist terms, a trigger is basically a condition that gives rise to one or more different versions of the self at a different point. But I won't get into that right now. So, in order to get off of a drug, you would first need to go into detox, and then you would need to go into rehab before you can go back out in the world and sort of be in recovery for a long period of time. So, like, our minds are heavily conditioned. Every time we've had a desire to get something, or as Brett was mentioning, an aversion, a desire to get rid of something, or any type of confusion about neutral feeling, our solution is always 100% of the time to want something, right? And then the wanting arises and creates a disturbance in our experience. And then when we acquire the object, that temporary cessation of that wanting is the happiness or the pleasure that we get from the object. And then we attribute that happiness to the object itself, when really it was just a momentary freedom from desire that we actually got when the object came. But this is actually what conditions all of our thinking, all of our speaking, and all of our behavior. This process of being driven towards an object and then experience a relief when we get it. So in the same way that a heroin addict has gotten used to using heroin to deal with stress or confusion or desire or aversion or depression or anxiety or whatever, we're conditioned in the same way. So in a sense, we're all addicts. So what the sitting practice is at first is your detox, right? So when you first go into seclusion, you experience withdrawals. You experience withdrawals from the forms of stimulation you're used to. You experience withdrawals from the social interactions you're used to. You experience withdrawals from the stories and the narratives you're used to hearing, even the stories you tell yourself out loud. You experience withdrawals from your normal patterns of behavior. So it's really unpleasant at first, actually, because now we're not giving craving that fuel. All of those different forms of clinging that are the fuel for craving are not being fed. And so it's just torturing us, right? Like, I mean, it can feel like torment when you first try a sitting practice. If you've ever gone into like a full retreat, it can feel like seriously like withdrawals happening. The dukkha goes nuts. But then eventually the mind starts to sober up. And then we get our first glimpse of the mind in its natural state. So it's like the heroin addict becoming sober. They finish their detox, they've become sober, they have moments of clarity, right? They start to see all the harm that they've done to themselves, all the harm that they've done to others. They feel a sense of like wise shame, wise regret over that. They have a desire to amend the harm that they've done to themselves and to others. And they kind of go through that in rehab, right? So that's sort of like you're integrating the sobriety through this process of rehab. But every person who's had an addiction, has gone through detox, who's gone through recovery, the rate of relapse is like what, 90% or something. I don't know the actual statistics, right? Because the world is filled with triggers. So this is really to answer your question, Shamil, that our habits of craving, our patterns of clinging, all the different selves that we're used to being are arising from the conditions in the world, our family, our friends, our jobs. So it's autopilot, right? And that's what you're contending with when you go out in the world. So you may be able to sit down in seclusion and start to feel a little bit of calm and a little bit of clarity. And then the second you run into your mom or an ex-girlfriend or a boyfriend or somebody that you've had conflict with, or you go to work or some kind of stress, then all of a sudden you're back in an old state of mind, an old birth, as it would be understood in dependent origination. So that's why it's difficult. It's difficult for the same reason why it's difficult for an addict who's left rehab to kind of stay sober. If that helps at all.
No, that's really helpful. I mean, it's a little disheartening, but also like a little like really helpful, just putting it in perspective, I guess.
Well, Michael, were you gonna say something?
Sure. So you don't have to say it as disheartening. That's just kind of the way that it is. So we could also use the analogy of practicing violin or a musical instrument, right? I use violin because it's an instrument I'm somewhat familiar with, and it can take quite a while to get proficient at it. And with violin, someone who can really perform violin very well can get up on stage, stand up, dance around, kick their feet up in the air, this sort of thing. But asking someone who's just a beginner, who doesn't have much experience, to dance and try to play the violin at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
they're just going to fall apart. They're not going to be able to perform anything at all. So it's like, first, just sit down, practice playing violin, getting yourself into a wholesome state, having wholesome thoughts one after the other. And as you do that more and more sitting, oh, well, now you can do it standing. Now you can do it maybe walking a little bit, right? Now maybe you can even do it in the middle of a conversation while you're talking with a friend or someone. It's like, oh, I just had an unwholesome thought and I can change that, right? So the seclusion part, that's just a necessary part for everyone, and it just is an easy way to begin practicing sitting in seclusion.
That's a great one.
Yeah,
That's a great metaphor.
that's really helpful. Thank you.
And for further listening or inspiration on this topic, Ajahn Thanissaro Bhikkhu has a recording, one of his guided meditations, and I found it. Even the Dhamma talk, I like to listen to his meditations. I get it. It's just the sound of his voice, the energy. It's wonderful. But even the Dhamma talks are quite skillful sometimes. And he has one entitled "Tips on Monotasking." Instead of multitasking,
Like-
tips on monotasking.
Single act samadhi is what they call it in Zen.
Precisely.
Yeah. Also, Shamil, when you said it was disheartening, my mind was like, what would Dhammarato say to that? He always brings it back to really, it's either an unwholesome thought or a wholesome thought that's present in your mind, right?
No, he'd be
And then
like,
listen to one-
oh no, woe is me, it's so hard.
Yeah, but what's delightful and heartening, you could say, is that because this is such deep-rooted conditioning. I mean, I like to think of it as from an evolutionary perspective. This is how nature, made it easy for us to survive. We don't have to think about everything we do. We're just kind of like driven by unconscious drives, right? And I think of the Buddha's teaching as sort of like something that came into that nature kind of brought to us in order to like get us out of this stage of evolution where we still need the reptilian brain. But anyway, what's heartening though is that you have encountered a very sort of like effective, easy, dare I say, instruction on the Dhamma. And most people, 99% of people, 99.9% of people probably live their lives stuck in this condition. And so what's heartening is that you don't have to. You now, you have a choice not to. And it may appear difficult at times, or difficult in the beginning, or difficulty may arise and pass. But you should feel delighted and heartened rather than disheartened that now you have a choice. Because the interesting thing about
whenever
go ahead.
Sorry. Whenever he spots disheartening, that's the second noble truth.
Mhm.
So he just spotted Mara. I spotted you, Mara. Hot dog.
Mhm.
And just smile. I mean, it's a victory when you spot the second noble truth. Then you can apply the noble eight path and slide into home. That's number 3. Relief.
Is Mara
That
doubt?
cooling bathroom.
Mara is like a personification of doubt. Yeah, would definitely be one major form of Mara. But
irritant.
yeah, I guess you could think of Mara as a personification of the second noble truth, of like the cause of suffering, right? He kind of runs the sensual realm. He governs. He just think of him as a personification of the second noble truth. Yeah, because he has 3 daughters, and it's Lobha, Moha, and Dosa, which is greed, hatred, and delusion. That's the 3 forms of craving, the 3 forms that craving takes. So yeah, anytime you see those, go ahead.
Mara is me when I'm in delusion.
Essentially,
Or
you can view it that way.
Yeah, if I'm the practitioner in general, if it's us when we're in delusion, not an entity outside of this body 1 fathom in length. The whole practice is within this body 1 fathom in length.
The word Mara is also another word for death. So there's Mara, like as in like Amara means deathless, right? Like Amaravati is the deathless realm. And it's like a shared concept between Buddhism and Christianity, that the idea that life and death are sort of conditioned. But in Buddhism, it's sort of birth and death are conditioned. I think of life as being void of birth and death, because birth is the arising of these different mental states that you become fully identified with. But one thing I thought about talking about today that I think is super helpful to this discussion, and that I don't know if Dhammarato does it on purpose, but he seems to really get people past the lower three fetters without them realizing it. So I thought about talking about the lower three fetters and why they're kind of so important to understand. If that's something you guys are interested in. I won't make it a super long because I'm not really. Well, does anybody know what time it is? My phone is not showing me the time while I'm here. How long have we been on this call for so far?
45 minutes.
45 minutes.
Okay. And the reason I bring it up is because of what Shamil said about it being disheartening. So people don't generally change, right? Like most people just sort of like receive a certain conditioning in their childhood, and then in their adolescence they sort of try to become their own person. And then, but most of us who've lived a little longer know that there's a certain point where you start to become your father or you start to become your mother, right? I'm talking to people who might still be in their mid-20s, so you don't know that yet, but trust me, it's true. But if you think about the lower three fetters, I think that the Buddha talked about the lower three fetters as the lower three fetters because they're the things that prevent us from being able to change, right? So there's identity view, which is your self-image. This is me. This is mine. This is who I am. Then there's Sila Bhatta Paramasa, which is attachment to rites, rules, and rituals. You can think of it as cultural conventions. And then there's doubt, So think of any conversation you've had with somebody where you've been very frustrated and trying to then, to change their mind. Like, telling, I'm not sure. Okay, maybe in like 15 or 20 minutes. 15 minutes. So yeah, think of when let's say I'm trying to think of an analogy that wouldn't necessarily. Okay, let's just say that somebody has like issues with anger. Okay, let's just use anger as an example. And or let's say they have issues with just like sadness and depression. That's a better one, I think. And you tell them like, oh, hey, maybe you should just try changing the way you think. And they say, oh, that's not who I am. I'm not the type of person who can do that. I don't have that kind of mind, right? That's attachment to identity view. They have this fixed idea of who they are. This is how they think. This is how they feel, right? They're a sad person. They're somebody who can't change. They're somebody who can't change their behavior. Why don't you just go for a walk? That's not who I am, right? So identity view, right? This is like all the ideas that we have, these fixed ideas that we have about ourselves, these fixations of these attachments to self view, right? So that's the first fetter to change, right? If you're identified with your suffering, and if you go back and watch all of these thousands of videos Dhammarato has of people, there are some people he talks to, and this is not uncommon, who they don't want to get out of the feeling of being poor me, that poor me feeling. They're heavily identified with their victimhood. And of course, like it's, parents reward us when we're sick and when we're sad, and our whole society rewards victimhood now. So, being identified with being hurt or broken is quite common. So that's just one example, right? Where identity view is an obstacle to change. And then, Sila Bhatta Paramasa, attachment to rites, rules, and rituals. And I love the fact that Dhammarato puts this as like shoulds and shouldn'ts, right? I should do this, I shouldn't do that. He calls it the critical parent, right? Things should be this way, they shouldn't be that way. You should be angry about this, you shouldn't be okay with that. All of this cultural conditioning. When my wife and I were in Thailand, everybody picked up everybody else's kids. They would take people's kids and put them in each other's laps. If you did that in the US, that would really piss a mother off, right? You shouldn't touch anybody else's kids, right? We have different cultural conditionings, different ideas of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Cutting the line or jumping the queue, as they say in English culture. when they go to Spain, they're notoriously frustrated because they can't get on a bus. Or if they go to India, they can't get on a bus because there's nobody queuing or lining up in India or Spain. They're just running on the bus, right? But our attachment to what we should or shouldn't do, or in the religious context, the belief that like a rite or ritual will lead to liberation, that if I just do the right thing, I'm going to get the right reward, or if I just do 100,000 hours of meditation, I'm going to get enlightenment. We could sit down, and this used to sadden me. You could see monks who have spent 20, 30, 40, 50 years sitting down and watching their breath or doing whatever kind of meditation, and they still are bringing up the same questions that you're starting out with. You're like, what's going on here? Well, it's because they have this faith or this attachment that if they just do this practice for long enough, it's going to bear fruit, when they're just missing the fact that they need to kind of turn around and look in the right spot, right? So these rules, these conventions, these beliefs are a major obstacle to us waking up and be able to change and be satisfied here now. And then last but definitely not least is doubt, which takes the form of questioning, right? And all of these different things that I've realized are different ways that craving has formed itself. It forms itself into your identity. It forms itself into culture when it's shared, and it manifests as endless questions, which are related to what we think should or shouldn't be the answer. You might ask somebody who you're talking to a question. If they give you an answer to a view that you have that you feel is the wrong answer, then you might be like, okay, I'm not going to listen to this person. So these three lower fetters are the major obstacles to being able to, as Dhammarato would say, to like wake up, take a look, and make a change. So I just wanted to put that out there for you guys to think about and see how you felt about it, right?
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Is it important, since we are discussing things kind of at a beginner or intermediate level as well, to make a distinction between the doubt that's one of the nivaranas, hindrances, psychic irritants, and the doubt that is the fetter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a difference, so the doubt that it's the nivarana is Bhante Pinyaji translates that one as mental oscillation. It's sort of like indecision. I call that like when you go to Safeway and you can't choose a cereal because there's so many cereal and you're looking at all the ingredients, or you can't choose a dog food, or you can't choose a cat food, or whatever. There's so many choices, like you're just like indecisive, but it does manifest as just endless questioning as well, just uncertainty about your situation,
Skeptical doubt.
especially when it comes to neutral feeling. But yeah, the doubt that's the fetter is specifically the doubt about what is and what isn't the path, right?
Path,
Yeah, and that doubt is extremely powerful because there's like 10 million trillion things that aren't the path, and there's one thing that is the path. And which is to just have a religious devotion to being okay with everything as it is. Honestly, if there's no other way I could put it, but yeah.
Outside of Loba Dosa Moha, which is not the path.
Yeah, I mean, those are all just different forms of dissatisfaction. So being satisfied is sort of the antidote to all those different forms of dissatisfaction. And
I concur.
It's just sort of like being devoted to being satisfied because the mind has been keeping you dissatisfied your whole life, and it knows exactly how to talk to you. It's like an abusive lover who like makes you feel good sometimes, make you feel bad other times, knows exactly what to say to get you back in the relationship. I've never actually experienced a relationship like this, by the way. This isn't personal sharing, but it's just an analogy. But yeah, it knows exactly what to say to you, like what questions to make you ask, what images to put in your mind. So yeah, that's sort of all the million different reasons to be dissatisfied. That's not the path. And then the sort of devotion to being okay with things exactly as they are, that's what the path is. And the immediate reaction to that people usually have is like, well, the only reason that people don't want to accept that, especially Buddhists don't want to accept it, is because you're like, well, this can't be it. I was expecting some big explosive bliss, right? But that's still dissatisfaction. So you're not really experiencing things as they are. You're not really okay with things as they are because you're still not satisfied. The satisfaction has to become complete in order for you to kind of experience what the mind is like when it's free of desire. So you just kind of have to keep doing it over and over and over, like Dhammarato says. And it's satisfaction. It's beautiful in the beginning, leads to deeper satisfaction. It's beautiful in the middle, leads to complete satisfaction. It's beautiful in the end, and that complete satisfaction is where dissatisfaction leads, right? You can't get from dissatisfaction to satisfaction. You have to go from satisfaction to deeper satisfaction to complete satisfaction.
And our vehicle is relinquishment.
Yeah, relinquishment of dissatisfaction.
Dukkha. And so I think there's also another function doubt can play, or another disturbance doubt can arise in, and that's in the 8th path factor of right concentration. And so then on our way into concentration, doubt can arise as I can't do this. I don't have the right method. I don't have the right teacher. None of those are true.
Mhm.
Unless you believe they are. And you won't, then you will have Micca Samadhi until you do gladden the mind. Live the holy life, and your sila helps your concentration, which brings you into discernment, which improves your sila, which makes concentration easier, which brings more discernment, and on and on and on. And that's our sila, our panya, our concentration. They all three interplay: our wisdom, our jhana, and our virtue. They're a dance.
It's one way you can check it. When you could just ask yourself, I could ask you all right now, is there any object, any person, any idea that when you get that, then you'll be completely satisfied? Like, okay, when I get this person, when I get this thing, when I have this level of understanding, like, then I will be satisfied. Like, do you believe that narrative that the mind tells you, when you actually think about it?
I'm satisfied.
Yeah, this reminds me of the Byron Katie myth. Do you know that it's true? Can you be absolutely certain that it's true? Something like this.
Yeah, I mean, because go ahead.
Oh, I mean, the only thing I would really keep thinking about is if I had an empty room and time to just sit there forever, I'd be satisfied. But I can't do that, or I'd die of starvation.
Right, but what if
something.
I told you there were plenty of people out there who have beautiful cabins in forests in Thailand and all the time in the world, and they're just sitting there being unhappy,
Yeah.
That being said,
Because
if you want to stay in an empty room in Thailand, hit me up and we'll get you over here.
yeah, those are available.
Sounds
Yeah.
like one of my cats is not satisfied. Let's see what's happening over here. I guess it was just a
Yeah,
patch of anxiety.
the point there is that if you're not satisfied with things as they are, then nothing will make you satisfied. That's sort of like the truth. That clicks at a certain point, my image, when I first met Dhammarato, was that there was this a secluded forest and me blissing out on Nibbana, whatever that might be, and he pointed out that that's a concept that the mind has created that I'm wanting, so I'm stuck in this wanting for this mental concoction of Nibbana in this perfect situation, which that's a spiritual materialism. Most of us have other things that we want, that is our ideal perfect circumstance where we'll be satisfied. But it's really at the point when you give up that dissatisfaction that you do become satisfied. It's sort of like we're walking around with 10 boulders in our hands and on our back, and the Buddha is like, oh, you know what? Actually, there's this great bliss you can get from meditation, but you got to put down those 3 boulders. And you're like, okay, here, I'll put these down. Oh, gives you some But you're actually, the bliss you're feeling is like the relief of putting those 3 boulders down. You think it's the meditation, but it's actually just you put 3 boulders down, you feel better. It's like, oh, you know what? There's actually a higher bliss if you put 2 more of those down, and you're like, put them down. You're like, oh, this is better. But actually, it's putting 2 more boulders down that made you feel better. And he's like, actually, the greatest thing in the world is this thing called nibbana. You know, it's the highest happiness. You just got to put the rest of those boulders down. So
No
you put them all down, and then you're like, oh, this really is great. And then it's like, but you realize that it's actually just like it's the relief of having put down all of the boulders that
Mhm.
that actually feels good, and the promise of the attainments was just there to convince you to put them down. And really, you didn't gain anything at all. You just were convinced to put a bunch of shit down, and the happiness that you have now is the relief of not carrying all this crap around anymore. And like that's the way that I see the path now. Just being convinced to let a bunch of shit go until you have nothing left that you're carrying.
And even in the progress of concentration, it often gets looked at as climbing up a hill or some sort of striving, when really right concentration in the sequence of jhana is a sequence of letting go. And if you look, even if someone or if a practice approaches it in, as some folks do, a more nuanced and technical way, still with 4 or 5 factors starting out or whatever they do, it's still a matter of dropping factors until more subtle states of mind arise, in which more and more subtle defilements can be seen and then dropped.
Can I ask something? I realized that usually in my practice, I have an unrealistic expectation of like, oh, I need to drop all this grasping and clinging that my mind is holding on to. And I find that to be really hard. So usually I just tell myself, just let go of this one thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, without expectation, it just feels good enough, and it feels good enough, and then this satisfaction just keep arising, and then eventually, it just feels futile to hold on to anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why I say this, because I think when I really just started practicing, I have this like, oh, I need to renounce everything, and it's so difficult, and it usually shoot myself in the foot, like it cost me more dukkha.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that thought, that unwholesome thought, I need to, right?
Yeah.
That's you being dissatisfied with your holding on to things. So
Yeah.
you got to start by being satisfied with your holding on to things, and then become satisfied enough to let them go, rather than telling yourself that you need to let them go and then be mad at yourself for not being able to let them go. The
Yeah.
little weird knot that the mind makes.
Ivan, are you referring then to your practice that you've discussed about waking up in the morning in more of a formal sit, or are you practicing throughout the day and pushing these things?
I would say both.
Because
It's just formal and just, yeah.
what I often do, and what I did throughout my own attempt to train the mind in anapanasati, is when those thoughts would come up, when those feelings of aversion for with these thoughts of confusion, these thoughts of, oh, I should just get rid of all these things and quiet the mind. The antidote to that, of course, is just forget about that and stick with the breath itself. And the closer you get to the breath, or if you want, to the entire body with the breath, and be sensitive to the entire body as you breathe in and you breathe out. But staying with the object, and that's what the object's for. And the longer you stay with the object, these things will fall away, and you don't have to push them away. The process of anapanasati itself is carefully designed by the Buddha to do that, and it will, especially if you keep at it, and that you don't overly judge yourself or judge your practice, especially while you're doing it, because that's gaining mind, comparison mind, and that's going to be an irritant, as Michael pointed out. It's an unwholesome thought. And so starting with an unwholesome thought is going to be an obstacle to jhana, right? Concentration and seeing the links of dependent origination, if that's what you're after.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got a quick question, you guys. First of all, thank you for this. I keep wanting to say satsang because I listen to some Hindu stuff too, and I'm like, no, this is a
Me
sangha.
too.
But
I listen
It
to
is
that stuff.
technically
anyway,
satsang.
Tomato,
That's
and
tomato.
maybe I'm doing too many things at the same time. But it's helped me so much already, especially accepting. I'm married, I got kids. I was doing dishes while I was listening to you guys, so it was great. But one place where I struggle a little bit is with my daughter's over here. Say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
So where I struggle, what do you want, baby? Your head? Go see mom, okay? I'll be right there. Oh, sorry about that. One place
She
where
sees you busy.
I struggle a little bit is work. So I went to school really late. I got my degree in accounting, but I was doing all kinds of stuff before. And so I got great grades and all that. But once I got to work, it was like totally different. It's like, oh man, the pressure and all that. It's nothing like school. Like most things, school is one thing, work is another. And so I've been struggling at work. I get my numbers, but it's like pretty low. And I've already kind of applied this thing where it's like, let's not worry about it, while doing everything. Like I would think about it all day long after work and all that. And I realized this was wrong, but I didn't know how not to do it, except, when what's his name? Mr. Dhammarato was like, well, feel good right now. Everything is fine right now. There's no problem. And just by doing that, it's helped a lot already. But
Mhm.
it's still not to the level I want. And I realize that's a desire. So just by trying to formulate this thing with you guys, I was already kind of answering my question. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
if I just relax there too, I probably will do a lot better. But I just want to get your opinion and see, because some of you guys have dropped a lot of wisdom just in this one little talk here gathering. So what would you, because I'm always trying to ask like a million questions. And I'm trying, wait a minute, what's the most important one that I'm struggling with right now? Let's start with this maybe, and then we'll get to all this other stuff that I'm interested in. So yes, what you guys have anything? I mean, maybe not work, but something that you're struggling with. Is it just the relaxing? I just need to practice more of the same and being happy with, because I find myself moments at work where I'm super happy. I just did something, I finished it. I didn't think I was going to, but I did it way before, so this like at one point does something, um, what's the word? A wholesome thought, like, wanting to get really faster and better at things. Is that really a wholesome thought? Like maybe it's not really a wholesome thought. So anyway, I'll
Yeah.
stop now and you guys chime in. Mm.
I recently
Go ahead.
articulated this to myself. The answer to every question you can ask is because I'm not satisfied or because you're not satisfied.
I see.
Why am I asking this question? Because you're not satisfied. Why isn't this good enough? Because you're not satisfied. Why am I not happy at work? Because you're not satisfied. Why am I stressed out with my kids? Because I'm not satisfied. Like if you start with, like we all do, a desire for to feel a certain specific way, like happy or relaxed or joyful or with deep understanding, then you're starting with desire. This is what makes it
Yeah.
difficult, because if you begin with desire, you'll continue with desire, and desire is what's giving rise to dukkha, right? So being satisfied, the reason that this decision, this devotion to satisfaction works is because you're being satisfied with things exactly as they are, even if the body mind is depressed, if the body mind is anxious, if it's stressed, if it's tired, if it's restless, if it's whatever it may be, if it's happy, if it's sad. The aggregates, the form, feeling, perception, thinking, consciousness. Feeling is one of the aggregates. We don't have much direct control over what feelings are arising and passing. What we do have control over is the tanha, which is the reaction to the feeling. So, there's those three forms of craving, which was wanting to get rid of and sort of being confused about, right? So we want the good feelings, we want to get rid of the bad feelings, and we get confused about neutral feeling because we're so conditioned by good and bad feeling. So making the choice, making the decision to be satisfied with whatever arises, you're basically starving that craving, that emotional reaction, that tanha of its fuel of dissatisfaction. So you just continue to be satisfied. You wake up in the morning, you feel groggy and tired. This is fine. This is good enough. You get stressed out. You go to work. You're tired at work. You're angry at work. This is just fine. It's fine. You feel the cooling effect right away. And you just keep returning to being satisfied. And then you get distracted because all of that relief creates like a bliss, right? You get so distracted by the bliss. You're like, oh, now I feel the way, this is great. But then you start wanting to feel that way. So you're back in dissatisfaction again. You're back in wanting again. And you've removed the cause for the bliss because the cause of that bliss was being satisfied, was not wanting, right? So it's always returning to being satisfied with things just as they are. You've been conditioning yourself a certain way for your entire life. If you want to take on different cosmology for eons, expansions and contractions of the universe, right? All of those old conditions are not going to stop arising and passing right away. They say in suttas that even arahats experience old karmic states of mind. That's like it's nibbana with remainder, right? There's nibbana without remainder, and there's nibbana with remainder. So even an arahat has remainder. Even the Buddha was followed by Mara for 7 years after his awakening. So Mara kept coming back to him. He just wasn't able to access him because the Buddha, there's a point where the mind sees the absurdity of giving rise to any dissatisfaction at all. It just always returns to a state of satisfaction, and that's the path. That's what you have to do. You have to just be satisfied with whatever is presently arising in your experience, and that
Yep.
will be the cause of your joy and your happiness.
Right. You want to arrive at a satisfied emotional default set point. But I think something I wanted to say, and can I say something to answer the thrust at the beginning of his question? I think he almost was asking for a practice at work, but I think the prerequisite for everything Michael has correctly said is awareness. So when we go to work, if we go to work, bring awareness there with you. I mean, you're going to be busy, you're going to be doing what you do, but when you're speaking to someone at work, when you're working hard, if there's a sense of challenge, whatever's arising, be aware. And that's in Buddhism, we call that sati. When that's clear and broad, we call that sati sampajanya in Pali. That means clear seeing. And so, but any light kind of awareness that you can bring, and just knowing yourself as you are working and being aware. And then you can spot these things that Michael is referring to, and you can return to satisfaction as soon as you spot them. And the proof will be in the pudding, as
Thank you.
Venerable Dhammarato says.
Thank you. No, it helps, and it's true because by relaxing and being satisfied in moments during my work, I suddenly started spotting certain things that I'm clearly doing wrong. Like I'm spending way more time on a refund or whatever the heck, and my mind is going in 20 different ways. But I wasn't seeing that. I've been there for like 6 years. I wasn't really seeing that. I was just seeing this dissatisfaction and nothing else. Then suddenly, like by accepting everything, except I'm not doing it long enough, or it just comes once in a while. So I understand it's a practice, but
Mm-hmm.
like just the last
Keep
couple of
training
weeks,
the
I had
mind.
so many insights, and I'm like, I hadn't done anything different other than relaxing into it, seeing this is okay right now. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing anyway. So why think about the next 10 things or if this day is going to be successful? I'm doing it right now. Like, let's not even think about that. I see you, Mara, you know. So,
Yeah.
but I thought maybe there
Hot
was
dog.
something else I was missing. Hot dog, exactly. No.
That sounds good,
In fact, I got a guy at work who just went through cancer, and he came out, supposedly free, and somebody gave him Thich Nhat Hanh's book, and I was like, maybe I should introduce him to Dhammarato, because I mean Thich Nhat Hanh is great, but this guy's all he is into movies and stuff. I'm thinking that's probably going to be really boring for him, but Dhammarato is definitely not going to be boring for him. So I'm still thinking about that. But thank you guys, I appreciate it.
You can lead the horse
I'm
to the
still listening. Go
Dhammarato,
ahead.
but
Thank
you
you
can't
for
make him
sharing.
drink.
It's a
Good.
benefit. Thank you.
Or Michael, you look like you were trying to say something.
No, it's fine. What I was gonna say has been covered.
Oh, okay.
Not in your
Yeah.
words.
And to
Okay, well,
Please.
I'll just say this. You know, just find ways of taking a break. You know, even at work, basically. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and this is where we can talk about, you know, getting yourself into seclusion is also a skill. You know, it's like you can go to the bathroom, you can go out where the smokers, you know, go take a smoke, but you don't have to smoke. You know, you can just go out there and chill. You know, there's all of these sort of like little hacks that you can find for taking it easy at work, basically. And you know, one thing Dhammarato has talked about many times before is like, you know, the person, you know, the person who's friends with the boss doesn't get fired, basically. So, you know, just be friendly with your boss.
I do remember him saying that. Yes.
With your coworkers, and
yeah,
and
make
that's
people smile.
a good conclusion. Yeah, just take it
Yeah.
easy.
This is
But you know, it's really funny. Is because ever since I've been listening to Dhammarato, now I'm thinking, so what is meditation good for? Like I know it's on the Eightfold Noble Path, but you never even
Well,
really mentioned. I mean, is it like saying, "Aha, Mara, I see you"? Is that kind of like the end of the meditation? Like what? When
it's
do
a
you
long time.
meditate, or when does he meditate? And what is he anyway? Is he a bhikkhu? Is he like? My wife asked me, so who is this dude that you listen to? And I'm like, it's just Dhammarato. I don't know. Is he, is he a monk? What is he? Anyway, let's answer the meditation question first. I mean, do you guys just do that separately?
Okay, it
Twice a
goes
day,
back.
whatever.
It goes
I
back
mean,
to my analogy about detox. Meditation, a formal sitting practice is like a sensory detox. The mind is so intoxicated by its normal conditioning. It's very difficult to see clearly. It's very difficult to see with wisdom. So like a formal sitting practice is a way of like detoxing the mind and getting the mind comfortable with a neutral object like the breath, because the mind is very confused around neutral objects, like objects that give rise to neutral feeling, like the breath. It chases after good feelings and it runs away from bad feelings, but when it comes to a neutral feeling, it just spins in circles. It doesn't know what to do. So you get the mind to kind of like be comfortable with a neutral object. There's an analogy in the suttas about tying a wild animal to a post. It's going to thrash and thrash and thrash and thrash and thrash, and eventually it's going to settle down and settle down and settle down and settle down, and then it's going to stop. So it's like you're tying the mind to this neutral object. And but related to what Brett said about sati, sati is to remember, right? So in the sitting practice, it's to remember the breath or to remember the body, and even in the moving throughout different postures is to remember the body, to remember the feelings, to remember the states of mind, to remember the objects of mind. But after the arising of right view in sutta language, sammasati is to remember right view. It's to remember the path. So in the way that we discuss it here, it's to remember to be satisfied. That's sammasati. It's always to remember to be satisfied. And in the Great 40, MN 117, Majjhima Nikaya 117, the Buddha talks about the Noble Eightfold Path differently for a noble practitioner, somebody who's had right view. First of all, he changes it from Sila Samadhi Panya to Panya Sila Samadhi, but he calls it Sama Samadhi with its 7 helpers. So, getting to your point here,
Bojangas?
samadhi is the word that's usually translated as meditation, although it's probably better. Bhavana is probably what we're really thinking of, which means cultivation. But essentially, the actual sama samadhi, the samadhi, the meditation of the noble path, is when all of the 8 factors come together, come and unify together. So, and that's led, he says in that sutta, by noble right view, remembering to be satisfied. We're going to use Dhammarato's way of explaining noble right view because I think it's the most workable. Remembering to be satisfied. So when we're remembering to be satisfied, then we're abandoning the desire to get things, to acquire things. So we're then also achieving the second factor, which is right renunciation, right inclination, right attitude. So remembering to be satisfied, we're letting go of wanting things we don't have. And then, of course, since we're satisfied, we're abandoning unwholesome speech, we're abandoning unwholesome action, we're abandoning unwholesome lifestyles or livelihoods. We're remembering to be satisfied. We are, replacing unwholesome thoughts with unwholesome thoughts. That's the right effort. So all of those things functioning together, that's what noble right samadhi is, right? That's what sama samadhi is. So we're always looking for like the sitting practice, right? But the sitting practice is like what Michael was talking about. It's like that practice play, performance play analogy that Dhammarato uses. Like it's going into seclusion, and the reason that we sit in seclusion is because it's the most sort of awake while being inactive posture. It's reducing stimulation to just a little bit, so we don't have to focus on so much. So that's kind of its function. But that sitting meditation, the way that you think of it in your mind, that's not what the Buddha is talking about when he talks about sama samadhi. The sama samadhi is the accumulation, the coming together of all 8 factors of the path. It's like a chemical equation, like if you were trying to create a certain chemical reaction and it required 8 elements and one was missing, you wouldn't get the chemical reaction. Right. So when all ingredients are together and that chemical reaction, that's the knowledge and deliverance essentially. But that's what sama samadhi is. It's bringing all the factors of the path together. Yeah. So the sitting
That's really
practice is
interesting. I need to dive into it. Yeah.
It's a controlled setting. Exactly what Michael said. You're not going to run around practicing violin in the street. You got to sit down in a quiet room and learn how to do it first.
Can I ask kind of a semi-technical question for you, Michael? Sort of
Sure.
semi.
Okay.
What about the 4 rupa jhanas and the 4 more arupa jhanas?
Okay. So I'm gonna go with Bhante Punjaji's take on this.
Thank you.
Which is, and I would say that it matches with experience as well. Bhante Punjaji, I'm not going to get into the reason why he translates everything the way he does, but he basically says that the form jhanas are the emotional realm and the formless jhanas are the realm of perception. So when you get into the first, second, third, and fourth jhana, it's an ever it's sort of it's a standing out of emotional reactivity essentially. Like it's a sense of coolness of the chitta, right? Like the emotional part of the mind is cool. So it gives us a glimpse of like you can really only understand something in its absence, right? So a frog knows what wetness is, but a fish doesn't, right? So a frog knows what wetness is because it's been dry. But a fish doesn't know that water is wet because the fish has never been out of the water long enough to become dry. So when you enter into the form jhanas, you become dry of emotion, essentially. and it gives the mind a deep insight into how like that craving conditions it, right? When you get into the formless genres, processes of perception start to cease. So you start to see how not just emotion conditions your experience, but like the actual process of perception, that's when you start to see how like, consciousness and its interaction with, different types of mental fabrications like concepts, name and form, and the way that the senses and the objects come together to create the self and the world and its objects. You start to see how these things are constructed and deconstructed, and so you basically come, going through all the jhanas, you see directly how the world is completely constructed, and it disillusions the mind to the solidity of all the static concepts that you hold at that point. It makes it easier to detach, to have dispassion, disenchantment, and relinquishment towards the mind's representations towards the world. So that's kind of the function of going through the jhanas. We might need to see the conditioned arising of all of our reality at that level in order to be able to renounce it. Or somebody who has a faith mind, right? He talks about a Dhamma follower and a faith follower. They might just be able to take someone's word for it, and they might be able to abandon. It's always about abandoning craving and clinging. You may not need to go through so many jhanas in order to abandon that craving and clinging. You may just need to like hear somebody say it in such a way that makes it make sense to you, and then you can abandon that craving and clinging there. So that's
Yep.
just like a very
Majimini
quick
comment.
version of
Yeah.
that. Would be a very long
MN
topic
64.
item to cover, but yeah. I mean,
And
kind
it,
of you
yeah. Michael, you pointed out to me a number of weeks ago, Sutta number 64 in the Majjhima Nikaya, and in the end of it, the Buddha answers Ananda's question of why are some released by mind, citta, and some are released by wisdom, panya. And he said that Ananda is dependent on their faculties, and so different form
exactly
have different need in the practice here. And I can say with experience, a certain number for me for this practice here, a certain number of years of formal sitting practice, I believe in this practice was a benefit. But that might not apply to anyone else.
Yeah,
and that's fine.
I mean, sometimes I forget about all that stuff that was there before, but anyway, I don't get into all that. Like a lot of
No, it's not necessary.
sobering up, I called it,
Yeah.
But anywho,
that's skillful. I like that. Yeah, the simile of the detox.
All right. This might be a good point to end the call if nobody else has any comments or questions. Hoping everybody feels satisfied.
Thank you for hosting, Michael. And good to see everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you, Michael.
That was great, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
But I'm not attached to it.
All right.
Guys. Have a great one.
I'll see you guys next time. Or at one of the Sangha calls.
See you again.
All right.
Yeah. Don't do this Thailand thing where I can never be on the call.
Sama Sambuddhasa.
Thank you.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa.
Thank you, Brett.